Author Herb Boyd joins us. He recently penned a book titled Black Detroit, A People's History of Self-Determination. He calls it part history book, part memoir, and love letter to the city. Welcome, Herb.
Hey, I like that love letter. Indeed it is, yes.
Tell me about your connection to Detroit.
Well, I was raised in Detroit. I was a part of the migration just before World War II really heated up from Alabama. It's a straight line migration from Alabama to Detroit. So going all the way back to the Underground Railroad, Detroit, because of its location, the proximity to Canada, when the fugitives from out of the South running away from slavery and everything arrived in Detroit, they thought they was in the promised land. But they discovered that slavery also existed in Detroit. So they found they had to go a little bit further, go across the river to Windsor, Canada. So it's that location that's important in terms of the Underground Railroad and starting the migration of these refugees, you might say, from the South coming to Detroit as opposed to Chicago or Philadelphia or Cleveland or New York City. So it began to populate it. By World War I, you have a heavy concentration of African Americans in this city, and it's going to create a number of problems.
So tell me about the love letter part. Not only is this your hometown, but it's clearly someplace that's very close to your heart.
No doubt about it, because it's like the old expression, you know, you take your culture with you no matter where you go, and Detroit is with me all the time. And certainly in the sense that my mother is there, and she played a tremendous role in pulling this book together, because I just kind of plowed through her memories and everything along with my own, along with a lot of research too. And that's the kind of the culmination of this particular 300 years of Detroit history, all the way back to its founding in 1701, down to the moment, to all of the bankruptcy and everything. So it was a pretty long episodic trip, you might say.
I think you call your mother one of Detroit's fearless freedom fighters.
Oh, no doubt about it. Just such a remarkable woman, and you go back to when she arrived, right in almost in the heart of the race riot of 1943, and she was an eyewitness to that. She was in the street. She saw, black men getting shot down. In fact, one black man was shot pretty much in half. That was enough to send her back indoors and not to go back out anymore. So that was pretty much her introduction to Detroit, because she had come a couple times before. But by 1943, we were there. I was there. I just arrived a couple of months before the riot broke out. So, hey, hello, Detroit. Here I am. And we thought that it was going to be an easy ride, a smooth sailing. But it was some rough moments there, the turbulence, the kind of challenges that black people face in that city. And that's what I talk about in the book, how we've overcome all of these obstacles, all of these challenges, and some of them pretty daunting.
There are photos of the book. There's lots of photos in your book, but there's one of you with Alex Haley and Rosa Parks.
Whoa.
There's one with Rosa Parks and Coleman Young, the city's first black mayor. What are those moments like?
All of it, like going back over, digging into the repositories and the archives and the museums and interviewing people. But more than anything, it was like my own memories of that city. And I was pretty much involved in every facet of it in terms of the economic, political, and cultural life of that city. I find myself at the Wayne State University, for example. I spent 15 years there, and it was a good perspective, a good platform to observe the kind of changes that went on in this city. Detroit has always been a very dynamic city, and I think what I'm trying to say in the book is that how pivotal that city is, not only U.S. history, but world history. Beginning with slavery, right down to the automobile industry, the big three, they're all there. The whole labor movement evolved there. When you get into the 1920s, when Henry Ford makes his offer, right on into the 30s, when you have the rise of the labor movement, into the 40s, the coming of World War II, the arsenal of democracy is right there.
Well, it's also the birthplace of Motown.
Oh, yes.
And I think no history of Detroit would be complete without talking about Motown. Talk about the impact of that on the city.
Well, you're talking about the industry and the genius of Berry Gordy and the connection to a very solid enterprising and entrepreneurial family, just absolutely full of gifted individuals, including his sister Esther and his father and uncle. All of them were involved in the creation of Motown, which the music becomes like the soundtrack of a generation, if not further, future generations. That music is everywhere. And what Barry did, he worked at Ford Motor Company. And he recognized something there in terms of the manufacturing process, in a whole assembly line. And he just took that and more or less superimposed that on a whole cultural development there in terms of all the talent that existed in Detroit, the musicians, the singers. It was just like a plethora of musicians that he just began to pull them into his
sort of
network.
A magnet. It was a magnet city, and that he was a...
And he has this charisma too, and the genius as a songwriter himself. And then he had an individual as a co-partner. Somebody was riding shotgun with him, was Smokey Robinson. And he brought all of these songs there, and Barry told him, say, you got some beautiful songs here, but make sure you tell a story. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so that was the lesson that he embodied and put it to Smokey, and Smokey just turned out a whole treasure trove of songs that we all know.
In the short time we have left, we know in recent years that Detroit has struggled and suffered, and its people have struggled.
Exactly.
How do you see the future of the city?
Well, I'm a cockeyed optimist, and I see the signs of rejuvenation. I see the signs of resurgence. Detroit has always had that ability. When you go back to the fire, back in 1805, when the city was virtually destroyed by fire, they had to kind of pull it up and rebuild, and so it's always had that kind of rejuvenation, no matter what kind of tragedy beset it. Whether it was a race riot of 1943 or the rebellion of 1967, we managed to come back from these setbacks. So I see it happening. The bankruptcy, it was a temporary blip there, but we see now where people in Detroit, the self-determination part of the book, that's always going to be a part of this kind of Detroit spirit. You go downtown Detroit, you see this huge statue. It represents the spirit of Detroit, and that is like without end. It's like something that I recognize, and how the young black people there and the music, contemporary music, as well as the urban agriculture that's going on there. People are going to feed themselves.
Herb Boyd, thanks so much for joining us.